Well, also in Kiev is Peter Dickinson from Business Ukraine magazine, who joins me live now. Thank you ever so much. Now, as far as we're aware, Zelenskyy is such an unknown entity. You know, now Ukraine have voted him in. What might his policies be like? What will Ukraine look like?
Well, the only honest answer I can really give is that nobody knows at this stage. And I would suggest that perhaps Zelenskyy himself doesn't know. His campaign has been very vague from day one. It's been a very broad change campaign, anti-establishment, anti-old guard. What the actual nuts and bolts of his program will be are still to be determined. I think he has to be seen as a reformer. He has to take a strong reformer stance very quickly within the first days of his presidency. I mean, people will be looking to see signs, indications of this change. Clearly, that's what they voted for. They voted essentially against the old regime. So he's under huge pressure now to come up trumps and to live up to this huge billing he has now as the face of the new Ukraine.
What do you think the priorities are then of the ordinary voters who voted for this extreme change?
Well, people talk about anti-corruption in Ukraine. The term is used very generally. I think it's important to point out that corruption in Ukraine is actually, on a large scale, it's institutionalized. So he needs to take on this institutional corruption. He needs to take on these systematic corrupt patterns that are deeply ingrained in a lot of the operations of the state. That means taking on the oligarchy. It means rule of law. The judicial system is deeply flawed, and this is a major issue in every aspect of daily life. So he needs to move very fast on the anti-corruption front and be seen to put in place people and who will forward this agenda. And I think people need to go to prison. Some people need to be held accountable for the crimes of the previous government and before that, going back to the 2014 Euromaidan revolution, the murders that took place, the killings that took place that nobody has actually been held accountable for, things like that. We need to see, the Ukrainian people need to see justice done.
Peter, what about the international implications of this, particularly in terms of Russia? Some might say Putin is the biggest winner in this election.
Well, the concern is that Zelenskyy's inexperience will be most strongly felt in the international arena, where a lot of people have talked before the election, and it will remain a very hot topic. How will this inexperienced young guy, basically this 41-year-old novice, deal with an operator as shrewd, as seasoned as Vladimir Putin? That's a huge concern. I think I wouldn't say you could talk about Putin as the winner of the election, because actually Zelenskyy and Poroshenko's positions on the war and on Ukraine's geopolitical trajectory are very close. I mean, they both recognize Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic direction. They both recognize Russia as the instigator and as the aggressor in the war. So actually, from a Russian point of view, this election has been a bit of a disaster, because it's the first time, or rather the second time after 2014 itself, when Ukraine has held a presidential election where there's been no pro-Russian candidate amongst the leaders. So I think the Russians now are looking to how they can work with Zelenskyy, how they can find a common language, or perhaps even find advantages in his presidency. They're certainly happy that Poroshenko's gone, because Poroshenko was seen as a very a very Russophobic personality and someone that the Russians couldn't work with. But it's not clear that Zelenskyy will be much better at this stage. He'll have huge pressure on him now to demonstrate that he is a credible war leader. That's perhaps the weakest of all his cards. I mean, he is a novice in every respect, so in every area he has to prove himself. But perhaps the most pressing and the most immediate concern will be his credentials as the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian military.
Well, Peter Dickinson from Business Ukraine magazine, thank you ever so much.